Think for a moment and tell me which is the world's biggest market for news and for journalism. Okay? Please don't do ChatGPT. Okay? Ready? The answer is India. A country with nearly 150 crore individuals, 150,000 newspapers and magazine publishers, about 400 odd TV channels, 400 radio shows, countless YouTube and Instagram reel producers, and crores of smartphones. India is the world's biggest market for journalistic content. By 2040, it is assumed that India will have 150 crore smartphone users, which means better outlook. So that means we will need more journalists, more copywriters, more proofreaders, more opportunities in journalistic media space. Correct? We should also see more universities offering journalism courses, right? Sorry, unfortunately, that is just wishful thinking. You see, Indian journalism may have grown tremendously since 1947, but that is only quantitatively and not qualitatively. I asked 20 people from the industry a very simple question. What was the one word that came to mind when someone said Indian journalism? And only two positive words appeared: diverse, vibrant. One word was also neutral, competition. Two of them were abuses, so I'm not showing them here. But as regards the negative ones, people use words such as hype, average, propaganda, sensational, blah blah blah. Someone also said discombobulated, which means confused or disorderly. So although Indian mainstream is extremely huge, the reality is different and may be upsetting to you. Indian journalism is fast losing readership, quality is deteriorating, career options for journalists are eroding, and when I say problems, people will remember the manner in which media covered the SSR episode, or the misinformation during Operation Sindoor, or that of countless flashy headlines. But our problems are deeper than that. In fact, when a newspaper agrees to alter its masthead, the least that the society can do is sit back and at least discuss about the deterioration of journalism in the country. So let's look at some of the problems. People are quick to remind, saying that, oh, look at the Indian readership survey, 37 to 40% people reading newspapers. Isn't that good? I don't want to say good or bad, but that study means that 4 in 10 people are reading a newspaper. So every time you use a train or a bus, are you actually seeing 4 in 10 people read a newspaper? It's a study from 2019. It is 6 years old. And secondly, it had just 2.56 lakh respondents. So the effective sample size is just 0.017% of the population. It's like me saying that I'm researching on the best course to take at IIT Powai, and therefore I should go and do some study. I go to the gates of IIT Powai. Inside in the campus, there are some 13,000 people. But instead of talking to 13,000 people, I just talk to 2 people, which gives me an effective rate of 0.015%. I could ask 2 gentlemen, and if they tell me that plumbing was better than artificial intelligence, then tomorrow morning should my story be that plumbing is better than artificial intelligence? So I'm not saying that IRS data itself is bad. All that I'm trying to tell you is that if you still want to rely on IRS data, then even the 1998 IRS data says that 60% of urban Indians and 1/4 of rural Indians were reading newspapers. Some people even today insist that readership is improving. Look at the digital channels. ET released a report saying 4.4 crore people visited their website. New York Times says that 10.8 million or 1.08 crore subscribers were digital subscribers as of Feb 2025. That gives you a range of how much digital channels have penetrated. But if you compare it to, let's say, things like the Play Store numbers, you will find that apps like TikTok, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Candy Crush Saga, PUBG, BGMI, etc. have 5 times more subscribers than those of the Hindu, Navbharat Times, Times of India, or other sources. And when you're talking newer mediums like YouTube, where Ravish Kumar have had a smooth transition, Indian mainstream media has not even experimented with a viable strategy. So when I see my favorite writer like Vanita Koli Khandekar say that, look, readership has been eroding, I agree with her. But I also mildly disagree that it's not just the factor of missing audience. There are several legacy issues which have not been resolved. So what are these so-called legacy issues that we did not resolve? The first legacy issue is nationalism and political peddling. Today, nationalism is not only sold discreetly but directly in broad daylight as well. When not limited to jingoism around critical war strategies, then financial and business newspapers will explain to you concepts such as FII, DII, currency, stock market, government policy, or even technology like AI, and weave a bit of nationalism into it. So, when everything can be connected to national pride, how does society even debate or discuss what's good or bad for them? I hate saying that we were like this only, but to some extent we were like this in 1970s also. That if you were to read and understand from this book called What Ails the Indian Press, which was written sometime around 1970s. D.R. Mankekar, the resident editor of the Times of India, clarifies that Indian media had problems. He admits it. Today, Indian media won't like to admit it. But Frank Moraes, the editor-in-chief of the Indian Express, clearly disagreed. Frank goes on to the extent of saying that in that era, in that generation, journalists were doing the job of the opposition by asking questions to the government. Are we seeing that today? In that book, Pratap Roy, an official with the BCCL, writes that in the very early days of the Indian press, nationalism was both its end and means. This is what he wants to say. Now, there's a lot that he has said in this quote. But if you read the last part of it, he says the changes have to be a far more reaching in nature, comprehending and interpreting the changes that are taking place in our society. What he tries to mean is whatever changes are happening in the society, the media has to change that and at least take that into consideration. The journalism and the public discourse that we get to see in India is one that of a postman. Data, content, statistics is taken as is and pasted as is. Be it GDP projections, free trade agreements, rural data, even inflation or performance of any sectoral data, these are just taken as is. Where is the critical thinking? For example, if tomorrow morning a Reddit post says that a graduate got a rupees 1500 crore job offer, should I as a journalist publish the story without any due diligence or basic fact check? Or should I actually go to the campus and find out if just one student got the admission, got the placement? What about the others? Indian journalism confuses with even basic statistical terms such as percentage, percentile, quadrant, minimum, maximum, mean, median, and even sum. Which brings us to the third problem, which is it's a sweatshop. Today, Indian journalism industry is a mazdoor ki dukan. It's not a workplace but a factory where people can be exploited to perform in whatever conditions and with whatever emoluments the publisher deems fit. We do have a wage board in India. The Majority wage board clarified on the wages according to revenue categorization of a news publication and on the basis of a city also. But the wage board also says that the central government can revise it periodically. On some websites, one feels that the entry salary is rupees 21,000. Somewhere else it is written 3.5 lakh to 8 lakhs. But being a part of the Indian journalism industry for nearly 14 years, I can tell you 8 lakhs is an upper ceiling reserved for the kin of the powerful. You will say, Array, Infosys graduate is already working at an entry salary of rupees 2.3 lakhs per annum. No. So I want you to now touch your heart for a second and think that be it a fresher at Infosys or a journalist, is 2.3 lakhs per annum sufficient to live in a metropolitan city? Shouldn't the industry at least strive to do a basic fact check on if there is a need to revise journalist salaries? In the very same book on what ails Indian press, Chanchal Sarkar, the director of the Press Institute of India, wrote a very scathing article titled Creeping Paralysis. In one of the paragraphs in the article, I'll not read the whole of it, he says a journalist would have to churn about 20 to 30 pieces a month in order to survive. The press is a sweated labor industry in relation to those who are not yet organized to negotiate. It shamelessly exploits those who could perhaps be the mainstay of its vitality in independence. If you go to a platform like a Glassdoor, it will tell you that the basic salary of a 0 to 1 year journalist is about rupees 15,000. In short, I see it as an exploitation which the wage board can clarify and resolve. What makes our situation worse than even 1970s is back then a senior media baron clearly remarked that he doesn't need editors. Today, it is becoming a reality that even if you don't have editors or reporters, and if you still wish to produce a product, there is a tool like AI which can be exploited and it can be used in order to create any sort of content. The business model of journalism itself is changing. Today, it is not the journalism of courage or journalism of relevance, but journalism of irrelevance. If a news medium is relevant, it is good for public, but nuisance for government and corporates. James Augustus Hickey's Bengal Gazette was the first newspaper of India, and it survived less than 2 years while competing brands survived slightly longer. Hickey was critical of the British administration and made several enemies. The Supreme Court Chief Justice Elijah Impey, British India's Lord Warren Hastings, and even a man of the church, a godman named Reverend Joseph Kiernander. Hickey had no other choice than to lock down his printing press and die an unknown man. Our history textbooks today have 2 lines on his life: first newspaper of India. Thankfully, Andrew Otis has done a commendable job in researching about Hickey's life. You should go ahead and read that book. Similar to Hickey, Swaminathan Sadanand never learned journalism as an academic subject. Sadanand was the founder editor of the Free Press Journal. He bought the Indian Express from Varadarajulu Naidu, but financial difficulties meant he had to sell the Indian Express. Sadanand was a fearless journalist, but in usual conflict with government and British administration. He was one of the 7 founding members of the Press Trust of India. Author V.K. Singh, in the preface of his book titled Media and Journalism, calls Sadanand as a good journalist but a very bad business manager. That very I am adding. In the good old days, there were spats. Indian journalism has a whole history where people like Ramnath Goenka did not budge even as others were called as the Indira Times. Goenka had to fight with the government to keep his newspaper relevant. During the emergency period, an editor like the upright B.G. Varghese was fired because he was critical of the government. Varghese approached the Press Council of India, but by the time the PCI was about to deliver in his favor, a lobbyist managed to convince the government to abolish the PCI itself. It was only years later that Varghese went on to resume his job and also went on to become a key advisor of the government. It is always said that a good journalist is like an alert shepherd, somebody who guards the villagers from intruders, including robbers, wolves, and tigers. We have always heard the story that if the shepherd lies, people lose trust in him. But what if the villagers themselves demand fake news? Maybe for fun's sake. Then what do we hold the shepherd guilty of? When you study media and ethics, you realize that there is something called audience uses and gratification theory, which means that even for fake news, there is a use case. Our bigger problem, India's bigger problem, is not that fake news exists, but that a big part of the media regularly produces it. One part of the audience is so enamored with fake news that occasionally I wonder if a part of our society is as engrossed with fake news as young boys are engrossed with porn. Fake news can be as dangerous as porn. But ultimately, you, the audience, if you guys are preferring fake, artificially generated news, which I am equating with porn, then in 2040, nothing stops Indian journalism from being the best and the most qualitative out there in the whole world. Unfortunately, we will be a factory devoid of any sort of humans. In 2040, the real journalists would then be busy selling poha and chivda at railway stations and bus stops. Ramesh Kaka, who lives by selling newspapers, will survive by selling something else. That PR professional will be busy selling insurance than reminding an editor to take a press release, because that job is something an AI could also do. And that will be the impact unless someone critically thinks about it. So subscribe and share this video to anyone you feel appreciates a bit of journalistic perspectives and some freewheeling conversations. Thank you so much.